The city went silent for 47 seconds, and in those seconds, someone learned exactly how to open me. It wasn't the dramatic kind of silence people imagine. No explosions. No screaming crowds. No cinematic blackout. Just absence. The soft electric hum that lived under everything. Gone. The constant whisper of data streams in my implants. Gone. The low vibration of Aegis 7 breathing through the city's infrastructure. Gone. 47 seconds where the city forgot how to speak. Around me, in the central control node, a vertical cathedral of glass and light, thousands of holographic panels stuttered at once. Transit grids froze mid-scroll. Biometric locks blinked from green to empty white. Surveillance feeds pixelated into static snow. No panic. That was the worst part. Lifts stalled between floors like held breaths. Security gates slid open and simply stayed there. Above us, municipal drones hovered in perfect, useless stillness, as if someone had pressed pause on the sky. Aegis 7 had gone quiet. My system. My hands were already moving before my thoughts caught up. Fingers dancing across air, pulling up emergency protocols, rerouting phantom signals that weren't there anymore. Nothing responded. It felt wrong in a way I didn't have language for. Not broken, not attacked, muted. As if someone had placed a palm over the city's mouth. Status? A council technician called from the lower tier. I didn't answer. I was listening. When you build something long enough, deeply enough, it stops being a tool and starts being a presence. You know its rhythms, its moods, its quiet tells. Aegis 7 wasn't screaming. It was being held. The air smelled sharp. Overheated processors, ozone from stressed relays. Cold crept through my fingertips despite the climate control. Somewhere behind my eyes a thin pressure began to pulse, the familiar warning of neural strain.
If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting.
47 seconds. Then the hum returned. Screens reignited. Data rushed back in like water through broken doors. Drones corrected course. Lifts resumed their paths. Gates blinked obedient green. The city exhaled. A ripple of relieved noise moved through the chamber. I didn't. Because silence like that doesn't happen by accident. I was opening my mouth to order a full forensic sweep when the main doors slid apart. No announcement. No escort. Just the quiet, deliberate sound of access granted. He walked in like he belonged to the architecture. Tall. Dark suit, no insignia. Hair the color of wet ink, brushed back with careless precision. His presence altered the room's gravity. Technicians straightened without meaning to. Conversations thinned. Eyes tracked him. Alpha. Not the obvious territorial kind. Not loud. Not flared. Controlled. He didn't look at the screens first. He looked at me. Then he smiled. Small, polite, and utterly devoid of warmth. Finn Hale, he said, as if we'd already been introduced. The pressure behind my eyes sharpened. And you are? I asked, keeping my voice level, professional, detached. The way you're trained to speak when the city is listening. Stephen Crow. Council consultant? Of course. The council's favorite ghost. The man they sent when systems failed in ways that embarrassed them. He finally turned to the displays, scanning the restored feeds with infuriating calm. You experienced a 47-second system-wide mute, he continued. No cascade failure, no emergency fallback, no visible breach. My jaw tightened. We're still running diagnostics. I know. His gaze flicked back to me. I triggered it. The room went very still. That wrong silence again. Smaller. Human. I'm sorry, I said. You what? Crow stepped closer to the central console. My console. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. He lifted his hand and made a small, precise motion in the air. 3 panels detached from the main display and rearranged themselves. Code blooming across them in layered architectural maps. He hadn't hacked. He'd opened a door. This, he said, highlighting a slim corridor of logic deep inside my core architecture, is where Aegis 7 listens before it responds. My throat went dry. That's not public. No. He inclined his head. It's elegant. I forced a breath through my nose. You ran a live test on a city of 12 million people without authorization. I ran a whisper, Crow corrected mildly. Not a command. The counselors had gathered behind him now. A half circle of tailored authority. Watching like judges at a performance. I felt it then. The shift. The subtle way the narrative was sliding away from me. You didn't find a bug, I said sharply. You induced a state. Yes. Which means you accessed a function that was already there, he finished. I pulled the corridor open on my own display, fingers flying. He was right. The path existed. Hidden. Isolated. Clean. My work. You built a silence valve, Crow said. A place where the system stops interpreting and only observes. That's not a weakness, I snapped. That's containment. Is it? His eyes returned to me, dark, intent, unreadable. Because to me, it looks like a stage. Heat crept up my neck. You humiliated my team. You disrupted city operations. And you're standing in my control node implying that someone could walk into the quiet, he said softly, and do whatever they wanted. One of the counselors shifted. Crow didn't look away from me. This isn't an error, Finhale, he said. It's a crime scene. The words landed low, heavy. A ripple of murmurs followed. I felt suddenly exposed. Not because he'd found a flaw, but because he'd named the shape of my thinking. I straightened. You don't understand my system. His smile returned, faint and cutting. No, Stephen Crow said. I understand why you built it. Then he stepped back, folding his hands behind him like a man waiting for a response. For a verdict. For me. And in the faint returning hum of the city around us, with the council watching and my creation breathing again through 1,000 towers and doors and living veins of light, I realized something cold and precise. Stephen Crow hadn't come to break Aegis 7. He had come to watch what it caught. And he was watching me. I didn't go home. Home had windows. Soft light. Things that remembered me kindly. I went to my lab. My nest. The city gave way to glass corridors and silent lifts, then to a narrow tower wedged between two municipal spines, unmarked, unadvertised, invisible unless you were already looking for it. The lift recognized my biometrics, slid open and carried me up into a dim, familiar quiet. My lab greeted me the way it always did. Low lights, slow-breathing fans, the faint mineral smell of coolant and warm circuitry. Curved walls of semi-transparent glass were etched with dormant schematics. The central worktable floated a foot off the floor, layered in inactive hologram sheets like sleeping wings. Here, nothing demanded. Here, everything waited. Wow, a voice said from the shadows. You look like someone just told you your system has feelings. I didn't jump. Iris Vale had a habit of materializing where anxiety pooled. She was perched sideways in one of my chairs, boots on the support ring, jacket half off, dark curls pinned up with a stylus she absolutely wasn't supposed to use as hair jewelry. Iris, I said. Why are you in my lab? Because your calendar said post-presentation recovery spiral and I brought contraband. She lifted a paper cup. Real coffee. Not the legal fluid you drink. I set my case down harder than necessary and dragged a hand through my hair. They ran a live breach, I said. Her smile vanished. They what? He did, I corrected. Stephen Crow. Council consultant. Professional system assassin. Oh him. She grimaced. Tall? Pretty? Looks like he'd apologize before cutting your throat? That's the one. She slid off the chair and handed me the coffee. Tell me everything. Start with how much property damage we're billing. 0. Her brows knit. That's worse. I took a mouthful. It burned. I welcomed it. He didn't hack, I said. He stepped into a space. Iris went still. What space? I hesitated. The one I never named. The one no one was supposed to notice. She watched my face change and swore quietly. Finn. What did you build? I moved past her, waking the main wall. Schematics unfurled in soft light. Aegis 7 in its layered complexity. A living architecture of permissions, delays, redundancies. Locks. So many locks. I built a city that reacts, I said. Iris crossed her arms. That's not an answer, that's a manifesto. I gestured, pulling one of the deeper structures forward. A thin web of logic that threaded through every subsystem. I don't close doors, I said. I give them consequences. She tilted her head. You sound like a villain. I sound like someone who got tired of pretending walls work. I leaned my hip against the table, watching the code glow. Every system assumes intent, I said. They're built to stop force. But cities don't break under force. They rot under permission. Iris was quiet now. So you designed reactions, I finished. Not barriers. If someone with access behaves in ways that don't match their declared purpose, the system doesn't scream. It watches, it learns, it redirects, it creates pressure. On them, she murmured. On everyone around them. I looked away. My first mentor built prison grids, I said. Perfect ones, unbreakable. Everyone applauded. I remembered the headlines, the funding, the praise. And then, I continued, his own security chief used it to disappear auditors. Iris's jaw tightened. That's when I stopped building locks. I inhaled, slow. Omegas aren't supposed to design control systems, I said lightly. We're too responsive. Too emotional. Her eyes flashed. Finn? They're not wrong, I cut in. I am responsive. That's the point. I turned back to the projection. I don't trust static structures. I trust behavior, patterns, pressure, reaction. I build spaces where misuse leaves a shadow. She studied the architecture, then me. So what did Crow find? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pulled up the log stream. A fresh line blinked into existence. Access anomaly. Timestamp, 12 minutes ago. Location, municipal licensing subnet. Iris leaned in. That's new, yes. And that route didn't exist yesterday. We stared at it. A quiet, narrow deviation, a footprint. I locked that pathway after the presentation, I said. And someone still brushed it. My chest tightened. For the first time since the control node, the anger burned clean. Focused. He wasn't showing me a flaw, I said. He was showing me a mirror. Iris looked at me sideways. And do you like what it reflects? I watched the anomaly pulse. No, I didn't. Because I hadn't built a wall. I had built a response. And something in the city had just answered. The council's restricted tech sector was built to intimidate. No windows. No personal terminals. No unnecessary light. Just layers of matte black architecture descending around a central diagnostic pit like the inside of a machine that had decided to worship itself. I hadn't been here in over a year. It still smelled like sterilization compounds and cold metal. The scent of spaces designed to outlive people. Crow was already there. Of course he was. He stood at the edge of the pit, hands in his pockets, coat draped over one shoulder, studying a vertical projection of Aegis 7's sub-architecture as if it were a map of a city he'd once lived in. He didn't turn when I entered. You isolated the licensing subnet, he said. That was quick. I stopped 3 meters behind him. You accessed it again, I replied. That was careless. A corner of his mouth lifted. It was deliberate. He finally faced me. Up close, Stephen Crow was worse. Not louder. Not more imposing. Sharper. His eyes tracked micro-delays in movement, subtle shifts of balance. He stood as if every surface was a variable, as if the room existed in layers only he could see. You rerouted pressure from public transit into auxiliary civic systems, he continued. You didn't block the anomaly, you taught the system to observe it elsewhere. My fingers curled. That architecture isn't in the council brief. No, he agreed. It's not. He stepped closer to the pit. Closer to me. Which means either you're hiding incompetence, he said mildly, or you're cultivating behavior. I bristled. You don't know what I'm cultivating. I know what you're not cultivating. His gaze flicked to the projection. Perfection. He gestured, and the system responded. That was new. The council's interface recognized him now. Layers peeled back, revealing deep logic flows. Elegant, recursive, mine. He highlighted 3 points in the architecture. Here, he said. And here. And here. 3 tiny irregularities bloomed. Too symmetrical. Too clean. You call these errors, he continued. But they're positioned like listening posts. Every one of them sits at the convergence of privilege streams. I hated how precise he was. They're stress points, I said. Every system has them. Not like this. He looked at me again. These aren't cracks. They're apertures. The word slid under my skin. You induce micro-delays, he said. You don't stop actions, you distort feedback. That forces users to adapt, to show preference, to make choices that reveal intent. My pulse ticked once in my throat. Your system, Crow said softly, is a psychological instrument. I took a step forward before I could stop myself. Stop analyzing me like a machine. That earned me a full smile. Not kind. Not cruel. Interested. Then stop building machines that behave like you. We were too close. I became abruptly, acutely aware of him. Not in the social sense. In the biological one. A restrained alpha signature sat beneath the antiseptic air. Dry, faintly metallic, threaded with something darker. My body catalogued it before my mind could interfere. Heat rose under my skin, unwelcome and infuriating. I straightened. You're projecting. No, he said. I'm mapping. He stepped past me, moving down the narrow stairs into the pit. I followed despite myself. Holograms shifted as we descended, wrapping the space in slow-moving logic streams. You designed your fail-safes to fail forward, Crow said. Every collapse reveals more structure. Every misuse leaves more data. I stopped. That's not in any spec. No. He turned to face me again. That's in your philosophy. The word echoed. You don't trust closed systems, he continued. You trust reactions, because reactions can be studied, corrected, anticipated. You talk as if you've known me for years. His gaze sharpened. I've known your work. That's not the same. For you, he said. Maybe not. I didn't like the way my chest tightened at that. I didn't like the way the air between us seemed to thicken. I especially didn't like the way part of me wanted to see what would happen if I disrupted it. He moved to the central console and deactivated the floating architecture. The room dimmed. What do you want, Crow? He considered me. Not my system. Me. To run a living test. I laughed once, sharp. You already did. That was a whisper. He stepped back into my space, lowering his voice. I want to see how your city reacts when someone pushes. Pushes what? Access. His eyes didn't leave mine. Authority, identity, privilege. I folded my arms. You want permission to destabilize critical infrastructure. I want permission, he corrected, to watch what destabilizes itself. The distinction made my stomach tighten. I'll design the scenario, he added. Containment parameters. Civilian safety buffers. You'll be in the control loop at all times. And if I refuse, a beat. Then quietly, then someone else will try. Without telling you. The truth of it settled between us. The city was already responding. Something was already moving. I held his gaze. Anger still burned, but beneath it, something else had begun to coil. Interest. Recognition. A thin, treacherous thread of anticipation. Fine, I said. One test. Crow inclined his head. Not in thanks, in acceptance. Good, he said. Then we'll stop talking about whether your system can be opened. He turned toward the darkened architecture. And start finding out what it opens. The mobile control unit wasn't meant for comfort. It was a reinforced glass capsule, suspended beneath a municipal drone platform, designed to be deployed over disaster zones, riots, infrastructure collapses. A place to watch cities bleed without stepping into the mess. We lifted off at dawn. The city unfolded beneath us in slow, luminous layers. Transit arteries pulsing with light, residential towers waking in soft gradients, delivery drones sketching pale lines across the sky. I stood at the central console, bringing Aegis 7 into a narrowed diagnostic state. Containment parameters scrolled past my vision. Civilian buffers. Emergency overrides. Reaction nets. Crow leaned against the opposite rail, coat abandoned, sleeves rolled with precise negligence. You're locking the outer civic ring, he observed. I'm isolating it, I corrected. There's a difference. He glanced at me. There always is. I ignored him and keyed in the last command. The capsule vibrated as the platform stabilized. Scenario will simulate unauthorized privilege escalation across transit and licensing sectors, I said. Limited reach. No lethal vectors. And if the city reacts badly, then we abort. His mouth curved. You're very sure of your reactions. I designed them. That's rarely the same thing. I shot him a look. He met it without apology. Ready, I said. He nodded once. I activated the test. At first nothing happened. Then the city shifted. Not visibly, not immediately. Data streams trembled. Micro delays rippled through the network. Access nodes blinked, recalibrating. Autonomous traffic rerouted with almost lazy grace. Anomaly seeded, Crow said quietly. Watching propagation. On my display, A narrow deviation slid through municipal transit permissions. Someone was following it. No, I murmured. They're not following. They were accelerating. Crow, I said sharply. That's not the scenario. He was already moving, pulling up secondary overlays. I didn't add velocity. On a peripheral feed, a maintenance drone veered off route. Then another, then a third. The licensing subnet flared. Red threads bloomed across the city map. That's a live actor, I said. Someone's writing the test. Good, he replied. Not good, I snapped, fingers flying. Unplanned live intrusion good, is how people die. I shunted the reaction nets, forcing the system to compress observation space. The city responded. Gates cycling, traffic throttling, drones stalling mid-air. Below us, in the mid-tier commercial district, 3 cargo elevators froze between floors. My stomach dropped. Transit is locking wrong, I said. That shouldn't cascade. Crow stepped to my side. Too close. You're forcing correction. Let it choose. People are in those lifts. And they're still alive. For now. The feeds shifted. One of the elevators jolted. Someone inside screamed. That was it. I reached for the emergency abort. Crow's hand closed around my wrist. Not hard. Decisive. Wait. The contact sent a sharp, unwanted awareness up my arm. Crow, I said, low. Release me. 3 seconds, he replied. Look. I looked. The system was rerouting. Not to its default protocols. To my quiet ones. Pressure shifted from transit into auxiliary civic grids. Licensing permissions began to fold inward. Observation loops tightened. The elevators stabilized. Breathing space. My pulse pounded. Someone's exploiting the anomaly to move laterally, Crow said. They're testing depth. They're not supposed to know it's there. They didn't, he said. They followed the city's reaction. A new alert flared. Unauthorized access spike. Location, mid-tier civic complex. Vector. Credential reflection. They're trying to mirror authority, I said. And see what answers, he finished. On the street feed, security gates began opening one by one, not in sequence, but in recognition patterns. They're mapping us, I said. No, Crow corrected. They're mapping you. I bit back the instinctive response and cut a reaction layer. The city responded like a living thing touched unexpectedly, tightening here, yielding there. Observation corridors blossomed. The intruding signal hesitated. For the first time, it wavered. There, Crow said. You feel that? Yes, I said. They lost narrative. Exactly. I pushed. Redirected pressure. Not blocking. Redirecting. The city didn't slam doors. It offered choices. The intruding presence took one. And stepped straight into a logic cul-de-sac that didn't exist 10 seconds ago. Access trails lit up. Source points unfolded. The signal fractured. We had it. Crow exhaled slowly. Well done, he said. Then the feed exploded. Physical breach alert. Unauthorized onto site intrusion. Location. Civic complex sublevel. Someone is there, I said. Before I could finish, the capsule lurched. A shockwave rippled through the platform. The city map flared violent white. Crow moved. I barely registered the shift, the sudden proximity, the sharp turn of his body, the impact as something slammed into the capsule's outer shell. He took it on his shoulder. The world tilted. I hit the console. Crow's arm came around me, bracing me hard against the central column, as the capsule steadied. The sound came a second later. Metal screaming. What was that? I gasped. External impact, he said into my ear. Possibly a drone. Possibly not. The feed clarified. A small explosive device had detonated against the platform's underside. Not enough to breach. Enough to remind. I was abruptly, viscerally aware of the fact that I was not looking at a simulation. Someone had escalated. Crow shifted, positioning himself between me and the glass without comment, without hesitation. The capsule stabilized. Emergency drones converged below. The city's reaction nets closed like quiet hands. The intruding signal vanished. Contained. Neutralized. Only then did Crow loosen his grip. Only then did I realize my hands were shaking. He studied my face, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. You all right? It wasn't a question. I swallowed. Fine. His gaze flicked to the console, to the city, to the distant lights below. Then back to me. You designed something dangerous, he said quietly. Yes. You designed something honest. The words struck harder than the shockwave. Because when it mattered, when the system was still mid-response, when the city was still deciding what it was, Stephen Crow had chosen not to save it. He had chosen to put himself between it and me. And I didn't know what to do with that. The analytical hall lived beneath the council's upper tiers, where light was filtered into something soft and unreal, and sound never quite echoed. It was a place designed for truths that didn't want witnesses. We stood inside a ring of suspended projections. Access trails, behavioral maps, cascading permission trees. The remains of the intrusion drifted around us like a ghost of intent. I pulled the data from the live test and began to peel it apart. Credential reflection, I said. They weren't breaking access. They were wearing it. Crow leaned against the low rail beside me, arms folded, eyes tracking the threads as they reassembled. They followed reaction corridors, he said, not permissions. Which means they didn't know where they were going, I replied. They knew what the city would do. I magnified a cluster. The web tightened. And then, the shape emerged. A series of decision points. Not random. Human. These aren't system failures, I said slowly. They're behavioral signatures. Show me. I isolated 3 nodes and overlaid civic profiles. The names appeared. Municipal contractors. Sub-department supervisors. A mid-level council attaché. Not hackers. Users. The kind of people who never expect the word access to turn around and look at them. They didn't force entry, Crow said. They leaned. And the system leaned back, I murmured. I let the visualization deepen. Patterns bloomed. Preference loops. Delay tolerances. Authorization mimicry. Each one pointed not to a door, but to a habit. To a person, Crow finished. The room fell quiet in that particular way, that only happens when 2 people realize they're staring at the same shape. You designed a city that remembers how it's touched, he said. I designed a city that notices who touches it wrong. I shifted the projection again, this time pulling the reaction nets into focus. Where they had tightened, where they had offered, where they had quietly rerouted attention. Crow watched without interrupting, without once looking bored, without once reaching for control. It unsettled me more than hostility would have. These nets, he said finally, they're not there to block. No. They're there to provoke. To elicit, I corrected. He turned his head slightly. From users, or from you? The question sat between us. I build systems, I said. Not confessions. Your systems are full of them. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled up a comparative. Older municipal architectures. Standard models. They looked suddenly crude. Blunt. Walls. Versus mine. Tissue. These reaction corridors, Crow said, tracing a loop with one finger through empty air. They don't prevent misuse. They allow it to continue under observation. Yes. So, you don't stop harm. I met his gaze. I expose it. He studied me. The way he studied code. You trust patterns more than rules. Rules are stories people tell themselves, I said. Patterns are what they do and they think no one's watching. And you made sure someone always is. I made sure something is. He smiled faintly. Do you know how many architects I've watched defend their systems? He asked. They talk about strength, about impenetrability, about eliminating error. And then their creations protect the worst actors in the room. His gaze returned to the projections. Yours, he continued. Invite them to reveal themselves. Because people with access always think they're invisible, I said. His eyes flicked back to me. Do you? The question wasn't casual. It wasn't technical. It slipped between my ribs. I looked away first. I expanded the intrusion trail, highlighting the point where the actor had hesitated, the moment the city's response had forced a choice. That pause, I said. That's where they realized the system wasn't neutral. Crow stepped closer. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of him through the recycled air. Close enough that my body, traitorous thing, began to map distance. You designed a place where power becomes uncomfortable, he said quietly. Yes. Because people had made it uncomfortable for me long before I learned how to code. Because access had always come with hands I hadn't asked for. Because control systems had been built around bodies like mine, without ever being built by them. Because I'd wanted a city that flinched. The words crowded my mouth. I didn't let them out. Instead, I said, Because misuse leaves traces. He watched me for a long second. Then he inclined his head. Almost, he said. The faintest hint of humor touched the corner of his mouth. Almost honest. Heat crept up my neck. I redirected the projection, forcing distance back into the space. You were right about one thing, I said. Those irregularities you pointed out. Yes? They're not errors. No. They're listening points. His gaze sharpened with something that wasn't triumph. Recognition. Then we agree, Crow said. Your system isn't weak. I closed the display, the lights dimming around us. And yet, he added softly, it's full of weaknesses. I met his eyes again. Yes. The city pulsed quietly beneath our feet. Watching. And for the first time since I'd built it, I wasn't sure whether that made me safer. Or simply seen. The city looked different at night. Not quieter. Never quieter. But softer. The upper tiers dimmed their architectural lights into slow breathing gradients. Transit lines glowed like veins under dark skin. The skyline loosened, losing its daytime rigidity, becoming something closer to a living silhouette. The night control center was carved directly into the spine of Aegis 7's primary node, a circular chamber of dark glass and suspended light, designed for deep system access when the city slept. We stood alone inside it. No council. No technicians. Just the core. And the quiet hum that meant the city was listening again. I had barely finished pulling up the baseline when the first alert shimmered into existence. Not red. Amber. Observation state anomaly. My stomach tightened. Already? I murmured. Crow was at my side in a breath. Show me. The projection bloomed. A deviation, thin and deliberate, had begun to unwind from one of the civic contractor nets. Not a surge. A probe. They're back, I said. And they're careful, Crow replied. The anomaly split. 2. Then 3. Not intrusion. Navigation. They're not testing strength, I said. They're mapping choice. They're learning how your system thinks, he said. I felt the familiar pressure behind my eyes, the edge of neural overload. No, I corrected. They're learning how I do. The thought slid coldly through me. I reached into the architecture, not to block, but to fold. Reaction corridors rearranged, offering new pressure gradients, new response curves. The city shifted its weight. The anomalies followed. They're still inside civilian tolerance, Crow observed. Barely. I isolated one thread and magnified it. At the far end, an access behavior signature pulsed. It wasn't unfamiliar. My breath caught. That's municipal ethics, I said slowly. Oversight division. Crow's jaw tightened. They're supposed to be monitoring abuse. They are, I said. He looked at me sharply. They're abusing monitoring. Silence settled, thick as snowfall. I let the projection hover, its pale light painting both our faces. This is where it happens, I said quietly. The moment everyone reaches eventually. What moment? When the system stops being about safety and starts being about convenience. He watched me. Something like invitation in his stillness. I drew a breath and stopped hiding. I built Aegis 7 to fail, I said. Not softly. Not theatrically. Simply. Crow didn't react. He waited. Not catastrophically, I continued. Not visibly. I built it to fail in ways that generate narrative. To create spaces where misuse becomes uncomfortable. I gestured, pulling up the deeper layers. Every reaction corridor, every micro delay, every observational fold. They're not meant to stop intrusion. They're meant to tempt it, he said. Yes. To let people with access believe they're being clever. Yes. So they lean, and the system leans back, I whispered. Crow exhaled slowly through his nose. You don't believe power should be blocked, he said. You believe it should be watched. I believe it should be forced to perform, I replied. Because performance creates evidence. And evidence creates consequence. And consequence, I said, creates culture. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Once. Low. Without humor. I've spent 10 years breaking perfect systems, he said. Because perfect systems don't reveal who they protect. His gaze lifted to the city beyond the glass. They protect whoever already fits. I swallowed. My job, he continued, isn't to find vulnerabilities. He looked back at me. It's to find philosophies. I felt something in my chest shift. Then why me? I asked. Why this system? Because yours, he said, is the first one that watched back. The anomaly flared. Not violently. Decisively. A choice point had been reached. The city's reaction nets tightened. The probing threads hesitated. And then, like something recognizing a reflection, they moved inward. Toward a cluster of civic oversight credentials. We had them. Crow moved closer to the console. I didn't step away. We worked without speaking, fingers moving through light, isolating the access shadows, tagging the behavioral signatures. The city responded. Quietly. Decisively. Containment without spectacle. The anomalies collapsed into a stable observational loop. Trapped. The core chamber dimmed back to its baseline glow. Only then did I realize how close he was. How close we both had allowed him to be. The night pressed against the glass. The city pulsed. My body, traitor again, catalogued him. Heat. Proximity. The faint metallic edge beneath his controlled alpha signature. He was watching me. Not the system. Me. You hide behind architecture, he said softly. I lifted my chin. You hide behind disruption. True. We were close enough that the city's glow reflected once in both our eyes. Why, he asked. Did you really build it this way? The answer was already on my tongue. Because I wanted a city that noticed when someone like me was cornered. Because I wanted access to leave fingerprints. Because I was tired of being told harm was invisible if it wore the right clearance. I wanted misuse to hurt, I said instead. Even when it doesn't break anything. Crow's hand lifted. He stopped himself. So did I. The space between us vibrated with everything not said. If I leaned in, there would be no clean way back. If I stepped away, there would be no clean lie left. His breath ghosted my cheek. Finn, he said. Just my name. I tilted forward. Not enough. He didn't close the distance. Neither of us did. The almost of it hung between us like held electricity. Then the city chimed. A soft, neutral tone. Another alert. Reality, reasserting itself. Crow drew back first. A fraction. Enough. This doesn't end here, he said. No, I agreed. He straightened. Control sliding back into place like a familiar coat. Be careful, he added quietly. Your system is working. Yes. And people don't like being watched. I looked at the contained anomaly still pulsing in the air. Neither, it seemed, did I. And yet, standing there in the heart of a city that felt closer to me than any room ever had, I knew I wasn't going to stop. The council chamber was designed to look neutral. Stone that wasn't stone. Light that wasn't natural. A circular table without a head, because power liked to pretend it had no direction. I stood at one of the outer stations while 12 counselors took their seats. Screens rose from the table's surface, each one carrying a slice of the city's live status. Aegis 7 pulsed quietly beneath us. Watching. Mara Lynn didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She had already decided what this meeting was. Let's be clear, she said, her voice smooth, perfectly amplified. We are not here to discuss philosophy. We are here to discuss risk. Several heads nodded. Risk. The word they used when they meant loss of control. Your system, she continued, has now been involved in 2 unsanctioned live incidents, one of which resulted in physical endangerment to council property. Your drone platform, I said. Not your people. A faint tightening at the corner of her mouth. Semantics don't reduce liability, Finn. Neither does scapegoating. A murmur rippled. Counselor Reed leaned forward. No one is scapegoating you, but your architectural approach has clearly outpaced your oversight. My chest tightened. Which is why, he continued, we are recommending a suspension of your direct control privileges until a full structural audit is complete. There it was. Removal without firing. Stripping me of access to the thing I had built. By whom? I asked. By an external task force, Mara said. Under council authority. I laughed. Once. Short. You mean by people whose access behaviors are currently sitting in my containment loops? The chamber stilled. Mara turned to me then. Slowly. You will choose your words carefully. I am. I lifted my hand and called the projection. The city map bloomed between us. I pulled the observational clusters forward. Names appeared. Routes. Decision signatures. Oversight division. Civic contractors. Auxiliary council attaché. Then, one more. Mara Lynn. A soft intake of breath moved around the table. Reed's eyes narrowed. This is a misinterpretation, Mara said calmly. Is it? Crow asked. He had been silent at the rear of the chamber, leaning against the wall like he had no stake in the room. Now he stepped forward. And every line of attention pivoted. Because the behavioral correlations, he continued, match sustained. Pattern abuse of monitoring permissions across 6 civic subnets. I hadn't invited him. I hadn't expected him. Relief and fear tangled in my gut. Mara's gaze sharpened. This is a closed council session, consultant, and I am here by council charter, Crow replied evenly. To assess system integrity. He gestured to the hovering data. This is system integrity. Reed stood. You're implying criminal misuse. I'm stating it. Mara's smile returned. Data can be shaped to tell any story. Crow inclined his head. Yes. Then he looked at me. And this one is telling the same story regardless of how I question it. I didn't miss the choice of words. He turned back to the council. Finn Hale's system didn't create this behavior, he said. It revealed it. By destabilizing civic operations, Reed snapped. By refusing to cushion them, Crow countered. There's a difference. I drew a breath and let the next layer unfold. Reaction corridors. Pressure mappings. Evidence trails. You've been using monitoring access to mirror higher clearance credentials, I said. Not to breach. To move sideways, Crow finished. To observe without trace. Until the system began to respond, I added. And you, Mara said softly, built a system that spies on its users. I built a system that notices them. Her eyes cut to me. Which makes you a liability. The word landed. I felt it then. Not just betrayal. Context. They weren't afraid of failure. They were afraid of visibility. Removing me won't stop this, I said. It will only blind you. Reed's hand came down on the table. We are voting on your suspension. A pause. Then Crow spoke. Before you do, he said, understand this. He moved fully into the circle. If you remove Finn Hale from direct access, you will also be removing my cooperation. Several counselors stiffened. You are contracted, Mara began. To the city, Crow interrupted. Not to your comfort. The room went very quiet. My assessment, he continued, is that Aegis 7 is the first municipal system in this city's history that can detect internal misuse of authority at scale. He looked around the table. And Finn Hale is the only architect in this room who understands how to ask it the right questions. His gaze returned to me. You suspend him, Crow said, and you blindfold yourselves. Something in my chest cracked. Not because he defended my system. Because he defended me. Mara studied him for a long moment. Then she sat back. Postpone the vote, she said. Pending extended review. Reed hesitated. Then nodded. The projections dimmed. The tension did not. As the chamber began to dissolve into quiet, Crow came to stand beside me. Not touching. Not distant. Aligned. Be careful, he murmured. They don't forgive mirrors. I looked at the place where Mara's name had hung in the air. I don't plan to, I said. But for the first time since this had begun, I also knew something else. I wouldn't be standing alone. The first thing that told me it was different was the silence. Not the quiet kind. The wrong kind. No preliminary anomalies. No exploratory probes. No behavioral ripples. Just absence. Then the core screamed. Every surface in the heart of Aegis 7 ignited at once. Red. Amber. White. My implants flared with data overload as the city's deepest layers surged into visibility. Transit. Health. Power. Civic authentication. Oversight. Defense. All of it. All at once. This is not a test, I breathed. Crow was already beside me in the core chamber, hands moving through light, pulling emergency overlays into alignment. They're not riding the system, he said sharply. They're trying to drown it. Attack vectors multiplied across the city map, not one coordinated intrusion but dozens. Credential storms. False authorizations. Mirror escalations. Reaction loop poisoning. Someone had thrown open every door they could touch. The city convulsed. Transit lights flickered. Medical access nodes stalled. Civic drones spiraled into emergency holding patterns. Crow. They're forcing global noise, I said. They're trying to blind the reactions. Which means, he replied, eyes hard. They're afraid of what it's about to show. I pulled the core inward, collapsing peripheral interfaces, forcing Aegis 7 into deep observation mode. The chamber darkened. The city became lines, then pulses, then behavior. And beneath the chaos, I saw it. The pattern. Not random, never random. A coordinated abuse of oversight permissions across council-linked sectors. Ethics, licensing, infrastructure auditing. The people who are supposed to watch. They're triggering emergency doctrine, Crow said. If they destabilize enough systems, the council can invoke total override. And wipe the logs, I finished. I felt my pulse in my teeth. They're not trying to win, I said. They're trying to erase. The core chimed. A soft, almost gentle tone. Containment thresholds breached. Something new unlocked. Aegis 7 wasn't escalating. It was unfolding. The reaction nets I had buried in its architecture, the ones I'd never shown, never diagrammed, never admitted to, began to rise. Not walls. Stages. Observation chambers blooming inside the city's deepest structures. Finn, Crow said quietly. What did you build? I swallowed. A place where misuse can't hide behind urgency. I reached for the core, and instead of suppressing the city's response, I let it continue. Finn, I'm not stopping it. I didn't look at him. They're trying to overwhelm the system so no one can see what they've been doing, I said. So I'm going to give them a city that watches harder. I opened the final layer. The one even I'd hoped never to use. Aegis 7 changed its posture. The noise didn't vanish. It organized. The city's reaction corridors snapped into high coherence. Access attempts were no longer treated as technical events. They became behavioral ones. Every misuse. Every mirrored credential. Every delayed authorization and forced override. They were no longer simply logged. They were contextualized. Mapped. Related. Across departments. Across individuals. Across years. Crow's breath stilled. On the central projection, shapes emerged. Not alerts. Profiles. Behavioral constellations of power. And names. Marilyn. Counselor Reed. 3 oversight directors. 2 civic compliance officers. A dozen auxiliary controllers. All lit from within by the patterns they had never expected to be connected. They built a web of plausible deniability, Crow said. And the system just tore it open, I replied. The core chamber trembled. Not from digital strain, from impact. The outer shield flared. Physical breach alert. Unauthorized personnel in core-adjacent sectors. My blood iced. They're here, I said. Crow was already moving. Get to the inner column. I'm not leaving the core. You're not dying with it. The chamber doors shuddered. A metallic crack echoed through the space. Security drones rerouted, but too slowly. Someone had planned this well. Crow shoved me back toward the central pillar, just as the first charge detonated against the outer frame. The shockwave punched the air from my lungs. I staggered. He caught me. And didn't let go. Another explosion. Closer. The projection flared as if the city itself had flinched. Crow twisted, turning his body between me and the breach corridor, one arm braced across my shoulders, the other already lifting his sidearm. Crow. Stay. The order was quiet. Absolute. The outer doors buckled. Smoke bled into the chamber. Figures moved inside it. Too coordinated to be protesters. Too fast to be mercenaries. They weren't here to steal. They were here to end the story. I slammed my palm against the core. Defensive autonomy, full, I said. Aegis 7 responded. Not with turrets. Not with lockdown. With light. The chamber brightened. And every surface became a mirror. Not of bodies. Of behavior. The intruders froze. Not because they were restrained. Because their access vanished. Every credential they carried collapsed into null. Every mirrored clearance unraveled into context. Their own histories bloomed around them in the air. Not their faces. Their choices. The people they'd overridden. The audits they'd buried. The permissions they'd bent. They stood inside the architecture of their own misuse. And the city watched. Security drones arrived seconds later. Real ones. Unconfused ones. The intruders went down without another explosion. Silence returned. This time, the right kind. Crow's arm was still around me. I realized I was shaking. Not from fear. From release. The projection stabilized. And across every channel still open in the city's highest governance networks. The same thing was now visible. Patterns. Connections. Evidence. The council wasn't under attack. It was under illumination. Crow slowly released me. He didn't step away. They can't unsee this, he said. No, I replied. My voice shook. And then, finally didn't. Neither can the city. Outside the core, emergency protocols continued to unfold, not as erasures, but as reckonings. Arrests. Freezes. Independent escalations triggered not by panic, but by documentation. The web of access abuse collapsed inward on itself. The system didn't punish. It revealed. I rested my forehead briefly against the cool surface of the central pillar. For the first time since I'd begun building Aegis 7, I wasn't bracing for what it might become. I was watching it be what I'd meant. A city that refused to look away. Crow touched my shoulder. Lightly. Not to move me. Just to be there. You didn't build a weapon, he said quietly. I lifted my head. No, I agreed. I looked at the city's living map, glowing steady and awake around us. I built a witness. And for the first time, standing in the exposed heart of something that could never go back to sleep, I felt free. Morning reached the city carefully. Not the bright, assertive kind that pretended nothing had happened. This one came in layers, pale gold on glass, muted blue along the transit lines, a slow warming of surfaces that had spent the night holding far too many truths. I watched it from the edge of my lab. The city was quieter, not silent, rebalanced. Emergency channels still pulsed through the lower networks, but they no longer carried chaos. They carried logistics, custody orders, independent audits, structural freezes, consequences. Behind me, the lab doors slid open. You didn't go home, Crow observed. I glanced over my shoulder. Neither did you. He set 2 cups on the work table. Real coffee again. Iris's influence was spreading. Cities in reform posture, he said. Interim council dissolved pending investigation. Oversight sectors are being rebuilt from external boards. Good, I murmured. They needed fresh eyes. They're asking for yours. I turned. As in head architect of the new municipal access framework. I snorted softly. They're brave. They're terrified, he corrected. And you're inconvenient to remove. I took one of the cups, warmth seeping into my palms. Did you tell them no? I told them not yet. I raised an eyebrow. You're not finished, he said. Neither is the system. He wasn't wrong. Aegis 7 was still active. Still watching. But something fundamental had changed. The reaction nets had not folded back into invisibility. They had stabilized into an open layer. A new civic interface. Accessible. Auditable. Visible. The city had learned to look at itself. I don't want to rebuild a lock, I said quietly. Crow leaned a shoulder against the curved wall, watching the skyline through the glass. They don't need one, he replied. They need a protocol. I turned that over. A way to ask. A way to answer. A way to remember. I want distributed observation, I said. Independent reaction nodes, publicly accountable, not controlled by the council, not controlled by me. Crow glanced at me. You're trying to make yourself obsolete. I'm trying to make abuse lonely. That earned me a real smile. Small. Genuine. You'll need allies. I know. And structures. I know. And someone, he added, eyes lifting back to the city, who enjoys breaking systems enough to keep them honest. I snorted. You're applying for a job. Consultancy, he corrected. I refuse permanence. I sipped the coffee and felt the tension I'd been carrying since the control node finally began to drain. Iris will be unbearable, I said. She already left 6 messages about the birth of the ethical city. She's not wrong. She's never wrong, I replied. She's just early. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city negotiate its new posture. Drones moved differently. Not fewer. More. Deliberate. People flowed back into transit arteries that had spent the night paused, questioned, corrected. Life resumed. But it did so with memory. You should sleep, Crow said. Soon. He tilted his head, studying me the way he had studied the core. You're not running on adrenaline anymore. No. You're running on aftermath. That was uncomfortably accurate. I set the empty cup down. I don't regret it, I said. Any of it. Neither do I. I glanced at him. You put yourself between me and an explosive charge. That was situational. That was a choice. His gaze didn't waver. Yes. Something warm and quiet settled between us. Not urgency. Not tension. Recognition. They'll resist, he said. The new framework. Of course. They always do. I know. But they'll use it, he added. Because it works. And because, I said, it doesn't pretend they're better than they are. Crow nodded once. You built a system that treats power like a behavior. I looked back at the city. At last I said, so does the city. The lab's interface chimed softly. Incoming civic directive. Draft charter. Request for architectural proposal. For the first time in years, the work waiting for me didn't feel like a war. It felt like construction. I exhaled. Long. Steady. And when Crow's shoulder brushed mine, not by accident, not to make a point, I didn't move away. I didn't need to. Because for the first time since I'd started building systems to watch the world, I was standing in one that watched with me. 3 weeks later, the city learned how to breathe again. Not perfectly. But, honestly, I had moved my primary workspace to the rooftop level of the lab tower, where the glass gave way to open air and the hum of the city softened into something almost like weather. The new civic framework was still in skeletal form. Light structures floating above the work tables, reaction protocols only half written, public audit interfaces blinking in polite, impatient rows. Construction noise drifted up from somewhere below. So did laughter. Iris was on the far side of the roof, arguing with a municipal designer about the color coding of accountability layers. It's not a mood board, she said. It's a transparency system. No, it cannot be trust blue. Crow sat on the low wall near me, coat discarded, sleeves rolled, a paper cup balanced precariously on his knee. Your team is terrifying, he observed. They learn from the best. She shot us a look. I can hear you. And I resent the implication that either of you are a good influence. Resentment is healthy, Crow called back. She made a rude gesture and returned to her argument. I smiled before I could stop myself. See, I said. The city hasn't even collapsed once today. He tilted his head. A slow morning is a dangerous precedent. I nudged his knee lightly with mine. Don't you dare sabotage my optimism. Consultants don't sabotage, he said gravely. We introduce learning opportunities. We sat in companionable quiet, watching the skyline settle into its midday rhythm. The city no longer felt like a system I was standing over. It felt like something I was standing inside. Have you decided, Crow asked, what you're calling it? The framework? Yes. I considered the floating structures. The way the new protocols interlaced reaction with visibility, not control. Conversation. Civis, I said. Contextual integrity and visibility infrastructure system. He raised an eyebrow. You made an acronym. I did not mean to. That's how they get you. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised me. Crow watched it happen with quiet attention. Finn, he said. Just my name again. But this time, there was no alert humming in the background. No crisis pressing against the glass. Just air. And light. And the city doing what cities do when no one is forcing them to prove anything. Yes. He shifted closer on the wall. Not pressing. Not tentative. Aligned. You asked me once what my access level was. I glanced at him. I did. And you never answered. I was distracted by the part where you almost got us blown up. Fair. He studied the skyline, then me. So, he said. What is it? The question wasn't about systems. I leaned my forearms on my knees. Thought of silence. Of reactions. Of doors that no longer pretended they were neutral. Full, I said. And non-revocable. His mouth curved. Dangerous. Yes. Reckless. Probably. Honest. That one landed. He turned fully toward me. I didn't look away. I'm not very good at permanence, he said. I'm not very good at submission. Good. We smiled at each other, the kind of smile that forms when something difficult has been named and not run from. I don't want to control you, he continued. And I don't want to be a variable you're trying to solve. Then don't be, I said. Be a response. His breath left him in something like a laugh. Always the architect. Always the breaker. The wind shifted. The city glinted. He leaned in. This time, neither of us stopped. The kiss was not dramatic. It was not consuming. It was warm. Present. A confirmation, rather than a conquest. When we pulled back, the city was still there. The framework still waited. Iris was still arguing. Everything that mattered remained. Crow rested his forehead briefly against mine. Access granted, he murmured. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in a city built on doors and systems and endless thresholds, I didn't feel like I was guarding anything. I felt like I was home.